before we get going, it's not essential, but if you have sort of plain paper and a pen, there will be a point in our presentation where you might be asked to use it. But it's not essential if you don't have it. So,
all right. Okay. So thanks ever so much for having us here at Lean Agile Brighton. It's a real honour and privilege. I've known Carl Scotland for about 100 years, and I learned so much from working with him and then watching his kind of rise through the cosmos after I stopped working with him. And you know, it's great. It's a real privilege. This is a talk that we kind of roughed out at London Lean Kanban Day.
Hopefully it's much better now.
At London Lean Kanban Day early this year. And then Kate has ruthlessly made us zero in on one specific subject. So originally it was a kind of sprawling mess. Now it's, we hope, a lean-focused talk about something that we find interesting and relevant to us.
So Chris and I have done a couple of talks before at conferences on different things. We come from very different backgrounds. He is very expert in engineering. I have a business executive. You can make mean faces and be disappointed. But the reason that we wanted to do this talk is because I made this crazy decision last year that I would go back and get an MSc in cognitive psychology and computational models. And I'm loving it, absolutely loving it. So why are we focusing on the brain today? Because the things I'm learning, first of all, I'm learning that we don't really know why we do what we do and how we do what we do with our magnificent brains. But it's just the most incredible process that we have. This ability to reach out for a glass of water and pick it up and take a sip. You might think that's some kind of serial processing, but it's not. It's an amazing number of things going on in the brain. And if you take anything from today, one of the things that Chris and I really hope that you embrace is the brain is a tremendous asset. It's a tremendous gift. It needs a little bit of love and care. It needs sleep. It needs some pretty good food. It definitely needs water. It's oxygen that gets used when you're doing brain processes. It needs to be challenged. It needs to learn. And if you ever come across any ageist or any stupid marketer that says you stop learning or you learn less well when you get old, it's not true. Neuroplasticity is a beautiful thing. You can learn at any age and in any way. So we're going to move on to why we're talking, but we kind of just wanted to set that up. This thing is incredible, and my studies are just giving me such an introduction to the various scientific theories that are being explored about why we do what we do.
So there's a kind of dependency graph here with the brain at the top, which is what we're going to talk about, but I'm going to start at the bottom. Hardware. The reason I'm here really is because I'm a technology fetishist. I'm an absolute dyed-in-the-wool geek. It's the machines, the lights that get me excited. But they're fairly straightforward. They behave in a reasonably predictive way. You can tell that kind of like if you can have a spec sheet for a new chip or for a new piece of kit, and you're in a kind of fairly like, yeah, this is okay, this is pretty comfortable. I can take this thing apart and put it back together. I can see the bill of materials. It's all pretty good. When you move up into software, it's not as straightforward. And I think one of the great gifts to us from her work on the NASA space program from Margaret Hamilton was to elevate software to software engineering and say, actually, this is not glorified typing. This is not a clerical task that you look down on. It's the keys to it's the gateway to the hardware. Without the software, your hardware doesn't do anything. And software is complex. It's unpredictable. It's very hard to get right. We have great things like Liz and the BDD community helping us get it right, but you're getting into kind of more kind of nebulous and kind of sort of chaotic and complex domain. And then you get into people. And people, I find people a wonderful, challenging, and difficult subject. I think DeMarco and Lister's Peopleware is a fantastic place to kind of start on this. Their analysis of projects and their success and failure, and seeing that, oh, actually, these projects didn't succeed or fail because of the technology. They succeeded or failed because of the sociology, because you didn't get that right. So it's almost like we're vectoring on this constraint and this area of interest of the brain. And by working with Kate and spending time sitting down with Kate, and Kate telling me about her studies, the kind of epiphany was like, Chris has finally realized that people are actually an important part of the getting the hardware to do things equation. Kate's doing this deep dive into the brain as part of her studies. Actually, if you spend some time looking at current understanding of brain science and that, you can really get some interesting engagement with people and really kind of further your understanding of people.
So we used this talk to kind of focus on just one particular lean principle and one particular bit of brain theory that we saw as very interesting to be aware of when you're focusing on managing work in progress.
Precisely. So this is, for me, this is a design for life. This is something that if you can get a constructive engagement with, you can thrive, whereas otherwise you might kind of like, just about get by. But I think what's become clear to me as my kind of practice has evolved is that managing WIP is something that you can be quite sort of superficial and simplistic about. And you can have there's a danger of having a quite sort of simple model of it. So, well, we are within our limit of the cards in this column, so everything's all right. Nothing else happening, nothing to see here. But again, through the conversation with Kate and through understanding what's really going on with the brain when you do things like reach out for that glass of water, all the things that are going on in parallel, all the things that are happening in the background, I realize there's far more to managing WIP than just the kind of the explicit, this is what the team is working on right now. And we want to kind of dive into that and hopefully pull out some things that are sort of interesting and useful for you folks to take away from the conference.
Because we try to do, when we do presentations together, we try to give you things that you could take back and put to use tomorrow. So we're going to give something a go here. We can go to the next one.
Okay, cool.
All right, if you don't mind, I want everyone to be comfortable. I don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable, so you don't have to do this. But if you don't mind just taking your hands away from your laptops and your pens and things, and just, they could just be like this. We don't have any drama requirements here. You're now, in the next screen, because we're going to do a little trial run, and then we're going to actually do this, you're going to be given some information to read off. The first is going to be an equation. And then I want you to tell me, I would like you to speak out loud, but speak as quietly as you wish. Again, this is not intended to make anyone uncomfortable at all.
It's opt-in.
Yes, exactly. So if you'll read the equation, and then you have to decide if the equation is true or false. So it won't say on there, is it true or false? You just have to say, is it true or false? And then you'll read the rest of what's on that slide. Okay, so we're going to do a test now.
Okay, this is the trial run.
Next one. Okay. So, one. Is that true or false? And then you read piano as well, okay? So you're reading out the equation, you're then saying if it's true or false based on doing the quick math in your head, and then you're reading the word that follows, okay? All right, here we go. Next one.
This is like being at some strange cult rally.
Next one. Next one. Can you see? Next. Next. Okay, next slide. Now, if you have that pen and paper, without conferring with anyone else in the room, write down the words you remember in the order that you said them. Let's go to the next one.
Are we good?
Those are the words you said in the order that you said them. Welcome to the Operation Span task. which if you happen to have any members of your team who think they're superhuman and they can do 6,000 things at once and they never get anything wrong, is a really fun cognitive psychology experiment to play. Not to embarrass anyone, because that's not the point. The beauty of cognitive psychology is you're not looking at individual responses, but you're trying to understand behaviors in the population. And the operation span task is classic on working memory. And working memory is one of the brain theories that we're using today in this conversation. Working memory is a term that was coined in the 1960s in a 1960 paper by a gentleman named George Miller. He had 2 co-authors. And although he never did any actual research on it, he introduced this idea that at any given time, there's only so much that you can have in your brain. You have a capacity. This is a diagram from a gentleman named Alan Baddeley. At the end, we're going to put one of his great textbooks up, which, if you're curious about this stuff, it's very accessible to read, and I would actually recommend it. And so Alan Baddeley and his co-researchers began to define. I want to make it clear, we still don't know how and why we do what we do. So this is one of the theories. And the working memory theory is, and this is why it's kind of relevant to work in progress and every day at work, the working memory theory, which is quite well respected, is that every time you get some kind of visual or auditory stimulus, it's just what the brain does. It kind of brings up a little bit of memory stuff. Could be a bit semantic, bit of a habit, could be a bit episodic, a bit of an emotion. These things all just come together. This is a good thing. This is what makes us capable of looking at things. But it's also something that you have to bear in mind. Because what it means is everyone has different memories. Everyone has different things that come in when they're starting to think about something. And if you try to overload your working memory capacity, you're just going to have to let some things drop out. It's okay. It's totally normal. It's got nothing to do with aging. It's just we have a capacity. And it actually does kind of play nicely into the concept of being able to manage work in progress.
So we go from this complicated model to this very simple model. So, and this was, I'm a manager, and I, until quite recently, had this very simple model of work, particularly with people who are working for me. It's like, well, there's work that you do during the working hours, and there's non-work, and I'm not interested in that. I'm just interested in the work bit. It was before I became a parent, I had very little patience with people saying to me, sorry, I'm late because of something to do with one of my children. My God, did I understand it once I became a parent. But it's, to Kate's point, there is so much going on that we make this sort of artificial step between what we're doing outside of work and our work, and part of that is entirely reasonable. It's a limit of liability. It's the time that you're paid for. But it doesn't mean that non-work stuff goes away. And what really becomes a problem, and this is again to Kate's point about trying to be superhuman or being an environment where people, either people create the expectation that you should be superhuman, or you think yourself, I must be superhuman, I must do all these things, is that you end up doing something like this. And the non-work gets squeezed out of the picture. And I still to this day am on phone calls with executives who say, I haven't slept for 2 days. I've been up since 3. I've been working on this raise. Oh my God, this pitch is amazing. I've been doing this for 2 weeks now. It's like, well, that's not something to boast about. That is not something to encourage. It's not a behavior.
And be comfortable knowing from a neurological and biological standpoint, their brains are not working as well as they could.
Yeah.
I've done it. I did it so many times early in my career, but now I've seen the science. You're actually not making better decisions. You're actually not doing better rational thinking.
And there's a great story about what happens when managers or employees themselves get into this setup where they're trying to kind of increase their capacity and do more work. It comes from Steve McGuire's Debugging the Development Process, which again will be on the book slide at the end. But it's a fantastic book. It's sort of early 90s about his role as a troubleshooter within Microsoft. So he would go to projects in trouble and sort them out again. And one of the projects he worked on was Excel for the Macintosh. And Excel for the Macintosh was late, it was getting later and later, and people were working ridiculous hours in an effort to kind of bail the water out of the boat and get the thing moving again. And the first thing he did, his first intervention on the project, was to go around at 6 o'clock and chuck people out of the building. Say, go home, have a life, don't stay here. To which people would say, well, yeah, but the project, and he'd say, well, your staying here later is not going to help, because when you deny all the things that are happening outside of your working life, deny all these other things that are happening and going on in your brain, they don't go away, they come back. And they come back with added context switching. So you then find yourself in a position where you are flip-flopping between the work and the non-work because you just haven't got the time and the capacity to work on these things outside of the allotted time for working day.
We're not even focusing today on the science about what it takes for your brain to context shift. Just respect the fact it's not instantaneous. Things catch up.
But it gets better. Not only are you context switching between the work and the things that you couldn't do because you don't have time because you were spending too much time doing the work, your actual thinking and attention on those bits of work is, so I forgot there was a build there, is doing time travel. It's going back and forward in time. It's going back through your your own internal narrative of how the work came to be where it was. If you're working on things that don't have sort of tight feedback loops on it, you don't know whether there's going to be a payoff until sometime in the future, you're having to hold an awful lot of stuff in your head at once. And this can become, this is why the sort of lean principles, not only of limiting work in progress, but also reducing batch size, are so important to me, and so it's sort of a fundamental of managing work. We live in what Oliver Burkeman calls a non-instant return environment, by which he means when we were in much simpler times and you could do things like pick your food off a tree or be killed by a tiger or not be killed by a tiger, you get a very instant idea of causality, of what would happen if you did or didn't do things. Now we have so much stuff, it's like, yeah, well, this project's going to ship in 2 years' time, and you've got the sort of weight of expectation of that 2 years sort of sitting on top of you as you work on your one little task. So anything we can do to break these things down and make them as small as possible, and critically in doing so, to recognize that every time we do something, the world turns, the world changes, and the future is a set of options, and there are options that need to be revisited every time we change something. So this is the Chris Matt's real options, which again is a fundamental thing that I come back to again and again. But it means that we can, rather than being in this sort of stuck in this massive piece of work in progress that is sort of taking over our entire sort of brain's resources, we can say, no, let's do something small. Let's recognize the fact that we only have so much capacity. We've also got a whole bunch of other stuff to think about. We bring ourselves to that context, so let's work on that small thing in context, get validation, and then say, okay, where should we go next? So I'm going to give you 3 examples from my practice about how I've taken Kate's science and translated that into what I do. I'll give a sort of health warning on this. This is what works for me. And some of it may seem like it's kind of like, yeah, right, I mean, doesn't everyone do that? It may seem quite sort of simple and straightforward, but it's stuff that has worked for me.
And I think what we want to do in this section, again, is try to give you some things that you can take back. And again, what works for Chris may not work for you. We're all individual. Our brains are all individuals. Our memories are all individuals. And by the way, our work environments are all very, very individual. So we don't want you to kind of hear something that works for Chris and say, oh, that's really naive. That can't happen in my office. Because what we want you to try to get from this time with us is this thing has some amazing capabilities, but also respect how it works better and how it works less well. So some of the things that we share with you might mean you have to explore different ways to have a conversation with a manager about how to make this happen, or you might want to try to have a slightly different conversation with the team. But the key is we're all very individual. We all bring different ways to deal with these issues that I'm pretty confident I've faced. I'm even facing them now. How bad is my judgment that I found myself in a work environment that's like a work environment I was in 30 years ago? But we set that aside. But anyway, so we've got these kind of 3 examples, but please realize how you adapt them to try to work in your world is the thing that we're really encouraging you to practice and think about.
So we've based it around the idea of the when you're working on something, it sits in a context, and in order to be able to focus and work on that, you need to have that context well defined. So the first thing we do is look at how you protect the context so you can actually focus and just do work on one thing well. Next, we look about how you kind of get up to speed to come into that context. So Dave Snowden spoke in his keynote about the hot belts around the drivers, which were just a way of just slowing the transition from one activity to another. When we come on to, I'll show you how I slow transition shifts in my own work. And then finally, when you come out of that context, you can say, okay, what shall I do next? Knowing that by being in this context and other people being in theirs, the world has turned. We don't know what we need to do next, but we can have a go. So the first one is about protecting the context. So you can be trying to do a presentation and talk to people or focus on being at a conference, and suddenly things pop up, and before you know it, you've got demand coming in from all over the place, and it's really hard. And particularly when it's kind of vague, I kind of need your input on this. Oh, right, yeah, the thing. Oh, yeah, of course, the thing. Oh, not the thing.
And you're probably starting to read about things like the hippocampus and the amygdala. They're rather emotionally charged in your brain. So when they get those kind of vague things, they just take over. And all that wonderful rational thinking in your prefrontal cortex loses all the energy and all the oxygen. And these guys start worrying, what does that mean? So again, how do you create this safe environment where these things don't pull you from what you want to get done at that time?
Exactly, yeah. And this is very much a case of do as I say, not as I do, because at this conference, I have done a terrible, terrible job of this. I have completely failed to set up the kind of defenses around my time to prevent me going off and doing conference calls or to go and attend to something at work. I've realized, it's really sort of clear to me at this conference, is that I have to treat the conference as if I'm kind of going on holiday. Going on to a holiday, but it's a learning holiday, and it's an engagement with community holiday, and I should treat it with the same kind of respect I would a family holiday and say, no, I'm there, I'm not doing this other thing now. I did a better job of it at Agile Cambridge. At Agile Cambridge, I actually blocked out and said, okay, I'm not available now, I switched my Do Not Disturb on, I sent emails to various people and said, no, I am doing this thing. But I was amazed, it was Kate that really kind of made me realize that I was just not doing that. Suddenly I'd be doing something and somebody would say, oh yeah, but I need you to look at this thing. I think, oh yeah, I've not told you I'm here. I've not told you that I've reserved time and capacity for this. I've been too porous, too open. I'm allowing you to come in and disrupt me, thinking that I can do that. I can be on that call and then do this and then do that. Turns out I can't.
And if right now that feels impossible in where you're working, you are beginning to think about how you could have conversations to set expectations. You may not be able to achieve the setting boundaries yet, but at least setting expectations, explaining to someone why you want this time, what you need to focus on in this time. I wouldn't underestimate people's ability to hear that and process that and say, okay, great, I'm going to give you some space to do it.
Yeah. So then switching into the context, and this is, I heard the Dave Snowden heated belts thing. I think it must have been in 2011 I saw it, but it's a great story, and it's one that I repeat and tell people all the time, because I think it really does talk to that need to be able to transition. Don't worry, we got it. 5 minutes, thank you. So I work with some really brilliant engineers. They are able to work at a far higher baud rate than I can. So I will get this beamed at me when I come onto a call with somebody, and I cannot get up to speed. So I have a trick to slow the other person down and speed me up a bit. It's a bit like, sorry.
Which I hate to say, but you're going to have to build it fast.
Okay, I'm going to build it fast, but I'm just going to say spaceships in Ian M. Banks novels, the way the smaller ones catch up with the bigger ones. I borrow a method from domain-driven design, which is to very slowly draw out on the shared screen or on the whiteboard what it is we're talking about, and just be really, really explicit and say, okay, so we're talking about just the load test now, aren't you? That's the context we're in, yeah? Okay, and it's the ingest service. Remind me, the ingest service, is that the one that talks to the asset repository? Yes, it is. Great. Okay, we're definitely talking about the same thing. And it's specifically the V2 item post API that we're talking about. Yes, it is. Great. Okay. And within that, we've got 5,000 items, and they all refer to the same asset ID. Great. Yeah, we've got that. Okay, now let's have a conversation about the test data. But
This is what I love about when you understand the brain. So Chris is a visual thinker, I am not. I would have been fine with that wordy email. And the thing is, you're working with people who are all different, and you need to know what your preferences are. And it's how you find a way to help people get to the same place. Because you already know they're going to have slightly different memories and different interpretations, but you're trying to find a way to come together and work together.
Cool. And so finally, coming out of that, so you've done some work, you've reached a point of resolution or a point where you can step out and you go into the next context. So, who works with something like this on a daily basis? They're quite popular now. And it's, at a simplest level, it would be a question of just saying, well, I can pull in something from the cube to do next. I love these. I find these so helpful, and they're such a kind of clear articulation of work to me, that I'm always really puzzled by why, when I'm working with other people, they're not interested. And it's always me that says, can we bring the Kanban board up on screen while we're having the call? And it's like, but why? We're having an interesting conversation about the work. Why do you want to bring that thing up on screen? And I thought, why am I getting so little traction around this? And again, I go back to the keynote from yesterday, this idea of order preventing variety. What I realized is that there is very little room for variety in this. And as an experiment, we switched to this. And this is a real-time board. Real-time board is now called Miro for reasons that are best known only to them. And what we do is we have the tickets from Jira are pulled into here, and then you can just put whatever else you like around it. And the options for what to do next are the little sticky notes. So they don't actually make it into the Jira space. And that's okay, because they're activity and they're not inherently valuable to track, whereas the outcomes we want are.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think what's really important, again, so Chris loves his Kanban. He's not joking, by the way. And so to realize that to make the team work better, he had to adapt what he thought was right for the team to what works better with the team. So again, that's part of kind of appreciating how extraordinary these things are. You might want to go in a slightly different direction. It's not irresponsible, it's just a slightly different way of visualizing it and letting people interact with it.
And this experiment is very much a work in progress, but what I was amazed by, and heartened by really, was the level of engagement I got. I suddenly found that things would appear on the board that I think, oh God, I would never have thought of putting that on there. Suddenly you've got, this is Rajneesh in India, so he's in a different time zone to us, but I come in the morning and I see, oh right, there's actually some screenshots of the thing relating to the question that we had that otherwise would have been yeah, I think it's right, I'm not sure. No, here's the evidence. Here we are, showing rather than telling.
So I think we're going to have to kind of wrap up.
Yeah.
Again, it was just this idea, 3 different areas, way to go from focus, way to move from focus, way to bring people in so that they have the same focus you want them to have.
And way to come out and then decide what to do next.
Exactly.
So, final thing. If you only take one thing away from this talk, it is, so here we have...
After the be nice to your brain.
Yeah. So we have Humphrey Bogart and Dorothy Malone in, I think this is in The Big Sleep, but it's to illustrate a quote from another Raymond Chandler novel. Time to be a human again. So this is when Philip Marlowe's come back from a hard day detectiving. Time to be a human again with nothing to do but rest and suck in the night air. And I love this. Rebuild the brain for tomorrow.
And
so
I know it sounds like pop culture, but cannot say enough. What happens when you sleep is amazing. Because some things get discarded in your short-term memory, some things get embedded in your long-term memory. Sleep is so important to your ability to learn and retain and then call up and use things when you need them. If you find yourself feeling frustrated that you're not remembering things and not being able to apply them, first of all, just take a look at your sleep habits. It really does need that time.
So we'll leave you with some book suggestions. So we have from Kate's studies at the top and from my industry readings and other readings at the bottom.
And the only thing I want to say about the book in the middle, The Mind is Flat, is that I'm loving in academics, critical thinking where you have to kind of read very counter to the things that you think are starting to be shown true in science. That's kind of a wild book. That's definitely not a Christmas read or a holiday read. But if you wanted to read something that is a very, very different starting point on what is the purpose of the brain and how does the brain work, you might enjoy that. And then the coloring book is actually not really for kids, but it's a wonderful thing if you want to learn a little bit more about the brain.
Fantastic. So I think we're pretty much out of time, is that right? So we will just go to the thank you.
Thank
and
you
say
very
thank
much.
you so much for having us.